This wasn't a family decision. It was a relocation campaign with spiritual packaging. The Flagstaff storyline strains credibility with the kind of determined choreography usually reserved for political campaigns and hostage negotiations. The premise insists this is a bold, family-led leap of faith. Yet the subtext shouts something far simpler. The move is engineered to serve Robin's preferences, with everyone else invited to nod along politely. In every family discussion where legitimate concerns are raised, cost, stability, the children, basic logistics, Robin perfects the art of strategic silence. Sit quietly, project sympathy, then apply gentle pressure in the direction already chosen. Naturally, the plot's most convenient twist arrives right on cue. Her son just happens to be accepted to a college in the very town Cody suddenly feels called to move to. And, as if coincidence needed a personal assistant, Robin and her household received the special early, unfilmed scouting trip, because nothing says transparency like a decision-making process conducted off-camera and ahead of the rest of the family. The justification is equally tidy. Living in Las Vegas is exhausting. Roots must be planted, and proximity to her son's future college is essential. So essential, apparently, that the destination can be reverse-engineered around it. Meanwhile, the other wives appear caught between denial and selective blindness, watching a foregone conclusion unfold while pretending it is still up for debate. Cody then provides the economic logic, warning that the market will tank because too many people are moving into Las Vegas, an argument that manages to be both alarmist and incoherent, especially when the proposed solution is to relocate to somewhere more expensive. Despite initial resistance, the other mothers capitulate with remarkable speed, and the ones most predictably harmed by this whiplash decision, the children, are left absorbing yet another upheaval dressed up as destiny. The language of callings does not function here as spiritual guidance. It functions as branding for a preference. The show repeatedly treats desire as revelation, as evidenced by the almost comical moments where Cody and Robin invoke divine instruction during mundane disputes, trading "God wants this" versus "God wants that," until the Almighty sounds less like a deity and more like a ventriloquist for their impulses. The calling looks particularly hollow when the real driver appears to be ego and appetite, sparked, not sanctified, then solemnly repackaged as righteousness. Even Robin's later revisionism struggles to land. A year into the move, with the Las Vegas houses still unsold, she claims she was screaming not to go, while admitting the idea of extracting equity was what made her halfway kind of open. That is not reluctance. It is bargain shopping. Mary, Janelle, and Christine all expressed that they liked Las Vegas and did not want to leave, but preference and consent are inconvenient obstacles when the agenda is already decided. The outcome is simple. Robin and Cody bulldoze the family into a move presented as providence, while the evidence on screen reads like a carefully managed relocation plan dressed in spiritual language and sold with a straight face. Let's be clear, this wasn't an apology. It was self-forgiveness performed out loud. The apology to Christine arrived with all the sincerity of a performance review written by the person being reviewed. What unfolded was not contrition, not accountability, and certainly not a conversation. It was a monologue, an indulgent, self-congratulatory exercise designed to grant one person peace of mind while demanding everyone else sit politely and accept the spectacle as growth. An apology requires interaction, acknowledgement, specificity, and the humility to absorb a response that may not be flattering. This was the opposite. It treated dialogue as an inconvenience and emotional labor as something other people are obligated to provide on cue. The result was a carefully staged attempt to absolve wrongdoing without confronting it, an effort that managed to be both grandiose and empty, which is an impressive kind of failure. And then came the masterpiece of narcissistic framing, the claim that apologizing would free Christine. As if she were still waiting in emotional captivity, shackled by the absence of his final word.
Christine is remarried, visibly content, and openly past the point of needing permission, spiritual, emotional, or otherwise, to move on. The idea that she, or Janelle and Mary, remained suspended in grief until he delivered a closing statement is not merely inaccurate. It is an ego fantasy so inflated, it practically requires its own camera crew. The most revealing part wasn't even the absurdity of setting her free. It was the glaring omission that dwarfed everything else. The children. An adult can lecture an ex-spouse about closure for as long as airtime permits, but the refusal to meaningfully address relationships with his own children is the kind of avoidance that doesn't age into wisdom. It calcifies into regret. The insistence that it is not someone else's business collapses instantly under one simple question. If it is not his business to engage with his children, whose business is it supposed to be? At least one voice finally pierced the fog. David's remarks, especially regarding the kids, landed because they were grounded in reality, not theatrical self-pity. Predictably, the response was discomfort and deflection. Accountability always feels intrusive when a person has built a life around evading it. Being put in his place was not cruelty. It was overdue clarity. The rest of the scene played out like a familiar ritual. Everyone sat there while the performance continued. No interruption, no pointed correction, no immediate refusal to validate the premise. The silence was baffling. Not because anyone owes a confrontation, but because the narrative being offered was so brazenly self-serving that allowing it to stand unchallenged felt like complicity in a lie. The camera later captured what should have been the centerpiece. Christine moved on long ago, well before meeting David, and there is no gaping hole waiting to be patched by a ceremonial apology. The only mystery is why that truth wasn't delivered directly, plainly, and in the moment. Because nothing punctures a delusion faster than a calm statement of fact. Meanwhile, the apology didn't end with Christine. It simply shifted targets. The plan to move Mary off her so-called defensiveness, spoken like a man bequeathing wisdom to the emotionally lesser, exposed the ongoing desire to control the emotional posture of others. Even after Christine walked out partway through the list, the energy was already pivoting toward the next confrontation, the next outlet for frustration, the next person expected to absorb the fallout. Mary, as usual, appears positioned to receive whatever rage remains after the cameras stop rolling. The only satisfying possibility is that she finally returns the treatment in kind, measured, direct, and unsparing. In the end, the so-called apology accomplished exactly what it was designed to accomplish. It centered him. It recast other people's closure as something he grants, their boundaries as something he negotiates, and his neglect as an unfortunate misunderstanding no one should mention too loudly. If the goal was to demonstrate remorse, it failed. If the goal was to prove how much worse this can still get, it succeeded effortlessly. The most revealing part of that race wasn't the racing. It was the man treating it like a mistake audit.
The contrast in commentary during Christine's race could not have been more instructive if it had been scripted in neon. When she failed to perform at peak capacity, Cody's reflex was to point, diagnose, and announce a missed marker, as though the primary objective was not encouragement, but the forensic documentation of shortcomings. David, by comparison, offered straightforward support, cheering her on even when she could not hear it, because that is what it looks like when someone is actually on a partner's team, rather than circling for leverage. Then came the moral sermon about maintaining a careful physical distance while David was on the track, justified by the reminder that he was a married man with a wife at home. An admirable concern for propriety delivered with the weary insistence of someone who never misses an opportunity to advertise his marital status. The difficulty, of course, is that this sudden devotion to optics does not align neatly with prior behavior. On Special Forces, the same figure reportedly paraded through the barracks in underwear and seized any convenient excuse to place hands on Bree and Gia. The performance of the shy, pretty wife narrative can be repeated as often as desired. It does not erase the impression of a man who reads as aggressively self-interested, conspicuously flirtatious, and entirely capable, indeed likely, of crossing lines outside the sanctioned framework of polygamy.
Claims of avoiding even the appearance of impropriety might land in a private setting. They become unintentionally comic when delivered outdoors, in daylight, surrounded by cameras, as though discretion were the only thing missing from the scene. Against that backdrop, David's most telling moment was not the cheerleading, but the intervention. The blunt directive to start with your kids during a transparently staged apology tour. The reactions spoke volumes: tightened posture, a fixed smile that looked pasted on rather than felt, and the unmistakable irritation of someone watching the script drift off course. When accountability is treated as an inconvenience and support is offered only when it flatters the narrative, the character breakdown writes itself. The graduation is not the event. Robin making herself the event is. Robin's sudden enthusiasm for attending Brody's boot camp graduation, alongside a 23-year-old daughter who is more than capable of standing upright without supervision, raises a question that should not require serious contemplation. Why, exactly, is she going? The answer, predictably, is control. Not support, not pride, control. This is not a mother attending a milestone event to celebrate a young adult's relationship and share in a meaningful achievement. This is a self-appointed hall monitor showing up to enforce a moral perimeter, ensuring the couple cannot be alone long enough to behave like two consenting adults with functioning autonomy. The premise is familiar. Never left unsupervised, no real privacy. Affection regulated down to an approved side hug and a carefully measured distance between hands. The only difference is the branding. The mechanics are the same. The logic being applied is equally theatrical. Any hint of closeness is treated like a biological emergency, as if a kiss triggers instant catastrophe. Exchanging hormones, eggs dropping, masculinity causing spontaneous combustion. The reasoning is so absurd, it almost becomes impressive. The imagined danger shifts depending on whether Brody is eligible or married, as though commitment itself somehow neutralizes the threat of chemistry. This is less parenting than superstition with a schedule. And then there is the more telling detail. Aurora is not treated like a 23-year-old woman. She is treated like property, managed, staged, and protected from the terrifying prospect of independent experience. The relationship reads less like guidance and more like an umbilical cord with a limited range of motion.
Stretch too far, recoil. And suddenly, there is Robin again, appearing as if summoned by the mere concept of adulthood. The situation becomes even more suspicious when the timeline begins to look curated. There is a strong implication that Brody and Aurora may have already been engaged when he was introduced, and that the storyline is not unfolding so much as being retrofitted. A new church appears. A new man appears. The narrative scrambles to explain how an engagement materialized to someone the audience has supposedly never met. It is the same pattern used when major life developments require a new character introduction. The show plays catch-up while pretending it is documenting a natural progression. That curation extends beyond romantic partners. The real circle stays off-camera. Friends are selected for their willingness to appear, not necessarily for their relevance. When something big happens, an engagement, a significant relationship, suddenly the production has no choice but to insert a new person into the storyline and act as though this was always the plan. None of this is inherently strange in isolation. A boot camp graduation is a big deal. Families show up because they are proud, because the occasion matters, because it represents discipline and sacrifice and a major turning point. People attend to celebrate the person who endured it and the relationship that supported them through it. But that is not what is happening here. This attendance does not read as pride. It reads as oversight. It is not a supportive presence. It is a supervisory one. The real spectacle will not be the graduation itself, but the inevitable moment when Robin finds a way to redirect the attention toward herself, as though the event cannot simply exist without her management, her commentary, or her emotional occupancy of center stage. At its core, this is the same exhausting theme with slightly different scenery. Micromanagement disguised as motherhood, control framed as care, and a grown daughter treated like a fragile doll that might wander off and discover she has a life. The fear is not that Aurora will get lost. The fear is that she will find her way. Here's the truth about that apology tour. It isn't about healing. It's about controlling the narrative before the original family rewrites it without permission. Robin's predicament is, on paper, straightforward. A husband eager to meet his former partners, make amends, and conveniently leave his current wife behind. The optics alone are humiliating. The implications are worse. Yet the performance required is clear. Smile politely, pretend to be supportive, and hope no one notices the panic behind the eyes. Unfortunately, the panic is doing most of the talking. The nervousness after the Janelle meetup was not subtle. It had the distinct look of someone calculating risk in real time. What was said, what was promised, what might be rekindled, and, most importantly, what might change. The concern is not merely sentimental, it is strategic. Any softening between Cody and the original family unit threatens a structure built on separation, grievance, and carefully managed narratives. Because this is where the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. The reflexive victim posture. Every interaction seems to be filtered through a single guiding principle. If there is tension, it must be an attack. If there is emotion, it must be hostility. If someone expresses pain, it must be aggression. Even a child's plea for love can't simply be what it is. It has to be reframed as confrontation, as though asking a parent why affection is absent is some kind of hostile interrogation rather than the most basic emotional reality. And that reframing is not accidental. It keeps the spotlight where it belongs, on the misunderstood adults, never on the children absorbing the fallout. It also conveniently redirects accountability. The conversation becomes about tone rather than substance, about how something was said rather than why it needed saying in the first place. Nothing says emotional maturity like treating a request for parental love as a personal attack. Meanwhile, the apology tour itself is a masterpiece of hollow theater. The apologies land with all the sincerity of a contractual obligation, said because the moment demands it, not because any meaning sits behind the words. This isn't remorse, it's reputation management, delivered with the careful vagueness of someone determined to sound evolved without actually evolving. What makes the situation deliciously unstable, at least from a narrative standpoint, is the small detail that, at the time of the apology, Janelle was still spiritually married. That technicality matters. It means that if reconciliation, or even a brief rekindling, were on the table, there would be no moral high ground from which to object. The rules, inconveniently, cut both ways. One can almost picture the sudden scramble to reinterpret those rules the moment they stop being useful. And that possibility is precisely what intensifies the anxiety. In a self-centered worldview, the meeting isn't about repairing old relationships. It's about the risk of being discussed, compared, or blamed. The assumption is that every room without her in it must be a room where she becomes the topic. In that sense, the absence isn't simply exclusion, it's loss of control. Even better, the entire scenario appears to have introduced a curveball into an assumed plan, one that relied on predictable outcomes and familiar dynamics. The discomfort comes from realizing the narrative may not be fully steerable. Cody, after all, is famously inconsistent, delivering emotional whiplash with the ease of a man who mistakes impulsiveness for principle. The instability isn't merely stressful, it's dangerous to anyone counting on him to behave according to script. Of course, the most entertaining hypothetical is also the most revealing. The idea of Janelle inviting him to try again, even briefly, just long enough to watch him twist himself into an excuse worthy of an Olympic contortionist. Because the truth is obvious. If accountability requires sacrifice, the sacrifice will not be made. The apologies cost nothing. Real effort would. And if the story ever escalated into the ultimate reality TV plot device, a return from a meetup announcing renewed intimacy, the resulting chaos would not be a surprise. It would be the natural consequence of a setup built on shaky sincerity, selective victimhood, and a man whose words rarely survive contact with reality. Never trust an apology that keeps saying, "I want to apologize," but never once says what he did. That single line, "Apologies offered, opinions irrelevant," was not a slip. It was the mission statement. Here stood a man announcing, with admirable candor, that the audience's response did not matter, then proceeding to demand credit for the performance anyway. An apology is typically a conversation. Acknowledgement, accountability, repair. This was a monologue designed to protect an ego, not a relationship. The repeated refrain of wanting to apologize never graduated into the inconvenient part where an actual apology happens, namely, identifying what was done, to whom, and why it was wrong. The list of offenses is not short, and yet the production managed to extract nothing more specific than a self-congratulatory intention. The tragedy is not just the emptiness of the apology, but the soft-gloved handling of it. There is a persistent refusal to challenge him on anything of substance. The obvious question, if other people's feelings are irrelevant, why perform the apology at all, hangs in the air unanswered, because confronting that would require treating the moment as reality instead of theater. The result is a familiar pattern. The offender dictates the terms, the room accommodates them, and accountability becomes optional decor. Then there is the rage, the kind that leaks through despite the polished script. The posture, the leaning in,
the tightened face. An intimidation routine delivered with enough restraint to remain television appropriate, but still clear in its intent. It is the sort of physically imposing body language that reads as a threat even when no words are spoken, particularly when a barrier is the only thing keeping it from becoming more overt. The same tactic has appeared in other settings, deployed against anyone daring to interrupt the narrative. When a person's default response to mild pushback is controlled aggression, the implication is not complicated. The cameras may be the only reason the behavior stays in the suggestive category. The hypocrisy is almost comical if it were not so revealing. If there were any genuine cunning at work, the counterfeit apology might land better. Instead, the performance collapses under its own stupidity, admitting, almost immediately, that it is a performance. Even the framing is narcissistic. The apology is pitched not as restitution, but as a gift, a benevolent act meant to liberate everyone else. As if the problem has been their captivity to his feelings and not the havoc created by his actions. The grandest flourish is the promise of healing, a word used here not as a concern for anyone else's well-being, but as a euphemism for restored control. Healing, in this context, does not mean growth, repair, or humility. It means returning to compliance, becoming a doormat again, resurrecting the illusion of a man he has never consistently been. The uncomfortable reality is that healing already happened elsewhere. By accepting that this is who he is, that he will not change, and that covering for him is no longer required. The anger gives the game away. Someone seeking to make amends does not bristle at the room's reluctance to applaud. Someone attempting reputation management does. The expectation was not forgiveness, it was reciprocity. The preferred outcome was a neat exchange, apology offered, gratitude returned, followed by footage that could be repurposed for personal vindication. When the response was stony and non-participatory, irritation surfaced, because the scene was no longer controllable. None of this is subtle. He openly acknowledges that he is perceived as an awful person, then launches a remedial tour meant to rehabilitate that image. The insult is the assumption that everyone else is foolish enough to mistake pageantry for accountability. The most chilling element is the consistent absence of empathy. The way emotion is treated as a prop, other people as supporting cast, and remorse as a tool. Call it self-absorption, call it pathology, call it whatever makes the producers comfortable. The effect is the same. A man trying to manufacture moral authority while radiating hostility toward anyone who refuses to validate the act. The newest spiritual look is not devotion. It is marketing with better lighting. Cody's sudden enthusiasm for Christian medallions and assorted religious ornaments is not a spiritual awakening. It is a branding decision, an accessory line launched by a man whose greatest faith has always been faith in himself. The problem is not that religious symbols are visible. The problem is that they are deployed as evidence of virtue by someone who consistently behaves as though the basic obligations of that virtue are optional, or worse, meant for other people. Charity, humility, service, moral accountability. These are not minor footnotes in the tradition he is so eager to advertise. Yet there is no meaningful sign of feeding the poor, helping the sick, protecting the vulnerable, or using public visibility for anything beyond personal advantage.
The platform is treated like a private ATM. Withdraw attention, deposit sympathy, collect obedience. Even more telling is the ease with which faith becomes a costume rack. There is a history of selectively borrowing from multiple religions, adopting whatever confers power, status, or justification, then abandoning the inconvenient constraints attached to those same beliefs. A cross appears precisely when it is useful,
not when it is earned. A new community becomes a new showroom. The message is clear. The symbolism is sacred, but only in the way a logo is sacred to a salesman. This is not unique behavior, merely a particularly theatrical version of it. Performative Christianity has become an industry, and he understands the market. The medallions and crosses are not declarations of discipleship. They are props, tools to persuade sincere believers that they are in the presence of a righteous man. And persuasion, after all, has always been the core skill. A lifetime of selling stories, selling authority, selling purity, while repeatedly failing to live by the standards being preached. The pattern is consistent across every phase. Extract the parts of religion that flatter the ego, ignore the parts that demand sacrifice, and then lecture everyone else on moral order. In one setting, the appeal is indulgence dressed as doctrine. In another, it is purity dressed as superiority. The shift in affiliation changes the accessories, not the character. The real insult is not the jewelry. It is the assumption that a symbol can replace substance, that devotion can be worn rather than practiced, and that righteousness is something that can be purchased, preferably in a shiny pendant, while the actual obligations of faith are dismissed as inconveniences that simply do not apply. They didn't pool money to build a family. They pooled money to pick winners. The family's financial setup is often excused as cultural, which is a convenient way of saying it makes no practical sense but should be tolerated anyway. The notion that all television income flowed into one communal account, then adults simply withdrew whatever they felt they needed, is not a family budget. It is an open bar with no bartender. An LLC may be sensible for administrative purposes, but that does not require turning grown adults into dependents, waiting for permission to access their own earnings. A functional arrangement would have issued each adult a clearly defined share, paid directly, deposited into individual accounts, and managed according to personal responsibility and long-term planning. Instead, the family embraced the lofty rhetoric of family money and family business, then acted surprised when it produced exactly what it was designed to produce: unequal power, unequal access, and predictable resentment. The spending patterns at the top only sharpened the absurdity. At one point, there were 18 children and 5 adults relying on the same pool. And yet, the lifestyle outcomes looked less like collective stewardship and more like a preference hierarchy with a mortgage. Robin occupied comfort and security, while Janelle cycled through an RV, then a small apartment, all while managing basic logistical burdens, hauling water for herself in Savannah, relocating the trailer regularly, like a pioneer reenactment nobody requested. The moral dissonance is impressive. Cody and Robin apparently found sleep quite achievable, while one branch of the family was improvising survival tasks. And even when Cody visited Janelle's cramped housing and criticized it, the obvious solution, fund better lodging for Janelle and Savannah, never materialized. Instead, criticism arrived promptly. Support remained theoretical. Of course, Janelle's choices were not flawless, because no tragedy is complete without a subplot of questionable decision-making. Purchasing an $82,000 RV when forced out of a rental was a major gamble, especially when other options existed, including Christine's former house. The RV was framed as a strategy to accelerate building on Coyote Pass, a plan that, shockingly, did not accelerate anything, and certainly did not deliver a house. Yet even that miscalculation does not sanitize the larger pattern. Robin's sizable debts were absorbed by the family. She secured the largest home, and she contributed little or no income in return. A dynamic that reads less like partnership and more like a sponsored lifestyle.
Meanwhile, Janelle's reluctance to buy a home was not mere stubbornness. Professional advice reportedly warned that purchasing at that time could jeopardize building loan prospects. An inconvenient detail when someone insists a real estate purchase is the magical answer to structural inequity. The broader point is simple. Pooling income is not inherently abnormal in a marriage or family. Many households do it without imploding. The issue here was never the existence of a shared account. It was the absence of transparent rules, meaningful oversight, and any mechanism to ensure fairness. With no checks and balances, shared finances became a euphemism for discretionary allocation, and discretionary allocation became a stage for favoritism. When one adult effectively decides who lives in comfort and who hauls water, the arrangement is not communal. It is managerial, and not particularly competent management at that. Subscribe.